put on by Wisconsin Public Education Network and League of Women Voters Greater Chippewa Valley, and we are so glad to see you here. This is an important thing to know something about before you vote at elections. I want to pass the microphone to our Master of Ceremonies, Deborah Kronmiller. She is the Executive Director of League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, and we are happy to have her here.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks to WPN, thanks to the League. I love being at these kind of events. I love seeing your wonderful faces and being interested in these important topics. The League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and the League of Women Voters of the United States had our start in 1920 with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And since 1927, so just a few years after we kicked off, we started promoting improvements in elementary and secondary education. So we have been in the education game for quite some long time. And we are in this game because we recognize that the foundation of our democracy is an educated electorate. That's the foundation. And without access to public education, quality public education, we will not maintain and be able to defend our democracy, which is the mission of the League of Women Voters. Through the years, since 1927, we have updated our education position to be more relevant. Most recently, we updated our positions to include much stronger language about our expectations for how funds will be allocated to the schools, our opinions about voucher school funding, and our opinions about how to provide funding to the UW system. And I want to share with you, because I think it's important that you understand our position, and that is to promote educational equity and access to educational opportunities for each child through non-discriminatory policies and an equitable state aids formula while retaining substantial local control. So the League, across many of our positions, what happens at the local level is key, but the overarching umbrella is what our national organization and the state organization is really advocating for. We have a long-standing education committee with the League of Women Voters at the state level. This is a subset committee of our larger legislative committee. Just so you know, our legislative committee this year alone lobbied on almost 500 bills. So we are in the Capitol. We are making our opinions known to our state legislators on a regular and ongoing basis. But one of the things we've done in the Capitol around education specifically in recent years is to be advocating for the bills that have come forward that want to increase the transparency and accountability of all funds being sent to education systems, whether that's elementary, secondary, or higher education. This includes funds not just sent to our public schools, but to our voucher schools. And we have argued with our legislators for years now about the same standard for all schools, not just public schools. Taxpayers have a right to know that all students are getting a supportive and proper education. Our democracy can't function without that. Much of the work at the League at the state level has been spearheaded by a near and dear partner of ours, which is the retired UW Dean of the School of Education, Dr. Julie Underwood. Now, Julie has been leading the charge for Wisconsin to live up to its constitutional responsibility to ensure that every child has access to safe, supportive classrooms where they will learn how to be citizens in this democracy. One thing that we've all come to learn is that without basic knowledge of civics, people are vulnerable to misinformation and sometimes to the downright lies that we're hearing in the media. Chris is going to share a little bit more tonight about the recently filed lawsuit that the Wisconsin Public Education Network and 18 other plaintiffs from around the state have filed. And challenges like this to the status quo, I think, are the only way that we're going to get a different, better, more accountable education system in Wisconsin. What we know is all children in Wisconsin are not the same. Children have different needs, school districts have different needs, and one formula is not meeting the needs of all of our kiddos. And so we really have to address the funding question from that angle, where I think our legislature of late has been thinking everything has to be dealt with the same. Well, the same doesn't work when it comes to public education. Next week is Civics Education Week, near and dear to my heart. And the League and many of our partners, like the Wisconsin Public Education Network, the Wisconsin Civic Learning Coalition, the UW Civic Health Initiative, the Center for Civic Education, and many more, will be working together to lift up the importance of civic education. Not that we don't do this all through the year, but we get a whole week next week to do it especially. And really it's important to recognize that in each district, we do not have a mandate to teach civics in the state of Wisconsin. In fact, there are 30% of the districts in the state of Wisconsin that do not teach civics at all. And throughout the state, there is no standard for civics. So even if you are teaching civics, and even if you're teaching it like you're the #1 in the class teacher of it, we don't know that because there's no standard at DPI to be measured against. So we will be talking about this, and we will be talking about other things such as the very good work of so many social studies teachers around the state. We're also coming up to the April election, and April is the nonpartisan elections, and we are aware that, teaching good government in school districts around the state has become a political issue. Some school districts aren't even, who had been teaching civics, are thinking about not teaching it because they don't want to indoctrinate their children to the truth about our government. This is craziness to me, but some running for school boards in April will be tiptoeing around the basic questions of civic education, questions that I think we all know the answers to. There are 3 branches of government. They are co-equal branches of government. We have a legislature that makes the laws, we have an executive that oversees the implementation, and we have a judicial branch that ensures that the laws in the Constitution are being upheld. In April of 2025, the National League of Women Voters declared that we are in a constitutional crisis. Our 3 branches of government are not doing their constitutional job. So we, the people, must hold them accountable. Which brings us back to the question of education and its importance. If people don't know the executive can't make laws through executive orders, you don't know that. If you don't know that the legislature is sitting on its hands and failing to govern, well, you don't know that. If you don't know that the judiciary is no longer impartial and is beholden to donors and other moneyed interests, it will be impossible for you, the people, to hold the government accountable. But we do know. And we are working to ensure that all students learn civics and use their power at the polls to vote in every election in which they are eligible to do so. We do know that if 8.5 million people unite and rise, get involved with civics, get involved with being active voters, real change can happen in the United States. And we do know this all starts with basic education. I'm delighted to be here to listen to the conversation this evening. So much of what the League advocates for and so much of the work done at the local level, state level, and national level around education is so important to our work defending democracy and empowering voters. And I'm just tickled to see all of you interested as much as I am. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Hi, everyone. Thanks so very much for coming this evening. I'm Chris Hambuch-Boyle. I've experienced the ups and downs and scarcity of public school funding for a very long time. Through my profession, 2 terms on the school board, and now as the Northwest Wisconsin organizer with the Wisconsin Public Education Network. And I want to tell you a little bit about the network. The network is a nonpartisan alliance of parents, families, educators, board members, administrators, school districts, and grassroots groups, and local advocacy teams across the state who are committed to the ongoing success of public schools. That piqued my interest when I got involved with them. We pride ourselves in being fair, honest, and relentless in pursuit of the resources required to ensure that every student in every public school has what they need to succeed. No exceptions, no excuses. We are fearlessly nonpartisan, just like the League, so that's why this is a good partnership here this evening. So I just want to thank Holly, Jan, and Marilyn from the League, I worked with them to put this together. And I want to just go to my next slide to tell you a little bit about the story on how we got here. Way back, I don't know what it was, November and December, Marilyn and Holly and I, do you guys want to raise your hands? Holly, where's Marilyn?
Right here.
Yeah, and then Jan, where's Jan? Jan, you're talking, there she is. We met to see what this would look like. We talked about public school funding in a way that there are so many nuances. I look at it like a Christmas tree. Every time they've wanted to fix school funding for the last 30 years, they add a new bulb on the tree, whether it goes with what's on the tree or not. And then we as people who support public schools, all those people I named that we support as a network, they have to figure out how to do it. So we decided to do 2 Zooms, one in January, you can see up there. We did the history of revenue caps inflicted as a 5-year legislative fix back in 1993. We still have them. They'll talk about that tonight because our experts are here. The financial impact of no inflationary increases, so we've talked about that on Zooms, but not everybody, there's some of you here tonight that can bring that knowledge. Then in February we did a Zoom about tax-funded vouchers for private schools, and that's when we kicked off the voucher transparency piece, which I'm not going to get into tonight, but we could do another one on that. And that brings us here tonight with an amazing panel of Chippewa Valley leaders, people that have been involved in our public schools. And I'm going to introduce them as they speak so we don't waste any more time introducing people so that we can have more time at the end for questions. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Top concerns, we just talked about them. State aid is inadequate and not keeping pace with inflation. We'll have someone on the panel talk about that tonight. Revenue caps widen the gaps and prevent districts from meeting kids where they are. Special education funding gap, and we already talked about privatization. There was a lawsuit that did get filed last week, right? We're already a week into it. And that we talked about tonight as well. So you also had a fact sheet, funding fairness fact sheet on your chair. I'm not going to go to the website, but that's from our website. So that gives you an example of some of the supports and information we have on our website. All you have to do is go to wisconsonnetwork.org, hit funding, and it'll bring you to that amazing sheet that you have in your hand, okay? And here's our little thing of the Chippewa Valley. Chad Trowbridge is here tonight, Mike Johnson, Rachel Henderson, and Reed Pecka. Our first person up tonight is Chad Trowbridge, the business manager for the Chippewa Falls Area Unified School District. I tell a little story about Chad. He was on one morning with Pat Kreitlow and just did this textbook, wonderful way of explaining things that anybody could understand. And I think that's been played over and over and over again. So thanks, Chad, for that contribution to the Chippewa Valley. I'm going to pull up your slides.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. You've heard quite a bit about the historical perspective of school funding, and I guess my role here is just to add a little bit of context to that. So as the slides are coming up here, this concept of revenue limits. There are still people who don't necessarily know what revenue limits are, but in simplistic format, it's just the amount of state aid and property taxes that a school district can generate. And it's based on student enrollment. So on a full-time equivalency, 1.0, that's the maximum amount of money that schools can get through the revenue limit. And the fundamental piece of that, I guess, that it looks different 30 years ago, it was commonly referred to as the three-legged stool. It was a revenue cap, a revenue limit, the QEO, or Qualified Economic Offer, and 2/3 funding for education. Two of those legs of the stool have been kicked out over time, so we now have a one-legged stool. I'm not sure what we'd call that. But essentially, the revenue limits do remain in play.
Oh, sorry, I'll get it.
Do you want me to do that?
No. Just say Chris to it, Albert.
So essentially, I've heard it referred to as musical chairs, and when the music stops, whatever a school district was spending in 1993, that became their revenue cap. So we have districts that have small amounts of revenue, we have districts that have higher amounts of revenue. So they weren't necessarily tied to anything other than that was the amount the school districts were spending at the time. When we look back at that, there's a lot that has changed in education in the last 30 years. Next slide, please, Chris. So it was a property tax crisis. That's what led to this back in 1993. We still have, the amount of local control that we do have is by referendum. I'll talk about that in another slide. But when the revenue limits were created, they were indexed to inflation. So we got some sort of inflationary increase, whether it was tied to consumer price index or some inflationary factor. In 2009, 2010, they were essentially unlinked from that. And I'd like to bring that up because the last biennial budget, prior to this one, many of you have heard about the governor used his veto power to give schools $325 per pupil for 400 years. I think there's 397 of those years remaining. But I bring that up because when amounts in the revenue limit were unlinked to inflation or indexed to inflation, in Chippewa Falls we were getting $271 per pupil. That's almost 15 or 16 years ago. And we talk about others talk about $325 like it's this big windfall for schools. And we'll show later how it just has not kept up with inflation. So all schools, and I think you'll hear more stories about that tonight from our other presenters, most of our schools have fallen behind when it comes to expenditures. So there are two types of referendums, and as voters, it seems like we hear about referendums all the time. There's a non-recurring referendum, and these are for operational purposes. So that's a temporary fix. It's a specified number of years. Could be 1 year, could be 5, could be 10, whatever a school board or school district decides. And then there's a recurring operating referendum. The recurring is a little more permanent. It stays with the revenue limit and grows each year. They're not very successful in terms of their passage because they're really, really hard to explain. And then the other type of referendum that might be more familiar to people is issuing debt. So if a school district goes to a capital referendum, It's to renovate or expand or replace older infrastructure within schools, or to maybe modernize education for today's needs. Oftentimes they issue debt, and that's scheduled on a repayment schedule, and that's what the capital referendums are, typically for facilities, bricks and more tangible kind of visible things. So as we mentioned, these revenue limits have been in place for more than 30 years. So why is this a major concern now? Well, I will say, and I think everybody here will say, they've been a major concern for a long time, but we have just gotten further and further and further behind each year. And we had just, again, have not been able to keep up with inflation. And then our demographics are shifting. We're educating more children with special needs. We have diversity within our populations. And many of us, I think most everybody here, is experiencing a slight decline in enrollment. It's not rapid, it's just we're graduating in larger classes than we're bringing in kindergarten. So that has a detrimental effect on the revenue limit as well. So this is my favorite slide. So
It's on their fact sheet.
when these revenue limits were unlinked or indexed to inflation, what you see here in this chart is how far our schools have fallen behind. When I look at almost $3,600 per pupil, that's $16 million in 1 year for our Chippewa Falls School District. We wouldn't need an operational referendum. We probably could do some more capital things without going to referendum, and we could meet the needs of all of our children with that kind of funding. So obviously that's the high point, gets smaller as the years have gone by, but ultimately that is a significant amount of revenue that would make a heck of a difference in our community. So I mentioned many of you have heard of operational referendums. 82% of Wisconsin school districts have had to go to an operational referendum. That clearly indicates a school funding problem. 2024 was the record. There were 148 questions. So you can see over time, since the start of revenue limits to modern day, more and more school districts have had to rely on those operational referendums. We're no exception in Chippewa Falls. We passed an operational referendum 2 years ago. We did it for 3 years, so we're facing the expiration of that referendum at the end of the 26-27 school year. So that forces us to make some decisions around our current operating cost and decide whether or not we'll go back to referendum. That likelihood is high, and it likely will be for a higher amount, mostly because of that change in inflation. Meanwhile, our state went from 11% above the national average in 2002, spending, we're the 11th highest spending state on education in the nation. We now rank 26th. We're 9.9% below the national average. That's a 20% swing, which is very, very significant. And meanwhile, in terms of budget priorities, back in 2004, you can see that spending on K-12 schools was at 44.6%. In 2024, 32.2%. I think that's it for me.
Okay, hang on, and I'm gonna get out of here. And now Reed's got the microphone. Reed is the superintendent of the Augusta Area School District. And when I looked at finding a smaller district in our area, Augusta popped up to me because they're going to referendum in April. So, Reed, share your story.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm surprised that you asked me. There's so many awesome educators in this area, and I'm a product of that education, being from Eau Claire and going to the university here, graduating and staying in this area. It's something that I feel very passionately about. And I grew up, I started teaching in Eau Claire. I was there for my first 13 years, and then I went to Augusta to take my first official administrative job 7 years ago as the middle and high school principal. And I really fell in love with the small school community. So for some of you that might have been in here, it's a place where you get to know every person, you get to know every family, every kid, for better or worse, whether you want to or not. You can't hide from them sometimes. They're everywhere. But that's also what makes it so unique, a small community. And something that I've just really experienced, this is my second year, so I'm learning a lot as I go. But something that has really kind of touched our community and has been a pain point to citizens is that over the last couple of years in Augusta, 2 years ago, we saw property valuations exceed 18, 19, even 20% or more in some of our municipalities. It was about 19% overall as a district. But some of our municipalities, especially near the Lake Eau Claire area, if you're familiar with that area, really saw some massive jumps. Last year it was 13% when the state was at 8%, and I don't know what it'll be next year. But I can guarantee that those property values are going to go up. So a place that maybe cost $250,000, which would have been a beautiful place 10 years ago, now might be worth $500,000. And some of the people are asking, how come my taxes have doubled? And certainly, just even in the last few years, some places have seen significant rises in their taxes. And when they look at that, the overall number, they see that the school is charging them more, and it's not. It's linked to the mill rate, which actually has gone down over time. But what's really hurting, I would say, at least in rural America, what I'm experiencing is that with these massive property valuation increases that are tied to what you pay in your school tax via the mill rate, our taxpayers are really in a tough spot. I think they support the school. I think they know that we're a center of the community and a hub of the community and a necessity. If the school were to leave that community, it would definitely change the community as a whole. So I think people understand that value, but I also think they're really starting to feel the crunch of the inflation, the costs of living going up no matter what. And if you're on a fixed income, $60 per 100,000 or whatever it might be can be a lot of money, especially today. So I think that's the bigger thing. When we didn't get any state equalized aid in the last biennial budget, I think that was a shock. Like Chad had said, the 325, while good, and we would take that, is not even keeping up with the inflationary costs. And we, in a small school with a special education budget that is significantly over budget every single year, where we're taking a large transfer of money to cover our Fund 27 or our special education fund dollars that we're spending from our general fund, Fund 10, it's really eating into our costs. And in a small school, when we have a child with exceptional needs, our resources are limited. Usually we have to buy in or add another aide or add another teacher. We can't have a cluster site. We can't have a group of certain, students with a disability enter one area and then have another area with teachers that are specialized to teach kids with maybe cognitive or intellectual disabilities. We have to teach all of them, and in one classroom there could be 5 to 7 students with very significant needs, and each one needing a very personalized or individualized education plan that our teachers and aides do an outstanding job of doing every day, a very thankless job. But that's an area that we're really seen as a need, or where we're lacking in resources. So as you're listening to things over the coming election, and as you hear about public education and this reimbursement at the state level, please know that last year we were reimbursed about 30 cents on every dollar that we spent in special education. The first time around this year with the new biennial budget, that was 35 cents to every dollar. So about a third of every dollar that we're spending in special education, that's all we're recouping from the state, leaving us to cover the other 2/3. And it's becoming an impossible task with the needs growing the way they are. So I think that's the biggest thing for us is the property values, as I'm sure that you are all aware, and the rising special education cost needs that we're committed to educating these children. We do need the tools and resources to be able to do it.
Thanks very much, Reed. You can pass to Rachel. Rachel Henderson is the board president of the school district of the Menomonie area. Rachel has in Menomonie, they've got a long story to tell, referendum story, voucher story, so take it away, Rachel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Chris for putting, and Chris for all of your work, and to the League of Women Voters for putting this on. I have been on the board of the school district of the Menomonie area for about the last 5 years. So we, when Chad put up the slide about the revenue limits having been set as a kind of snapshot of where school districts were spending in 1992-93, we're at the bottom. I don't know what happened in Menomonie in 1992, but we weren't spending very much money apparently, because we are now at the lowest revenue limit of any of the districts in the state. And the revenue limit, the kind of bottom, was recently increased, so that we are with a lot of other districts at that bottom, but we are at the lowest point for per pupil revenue limits in the state. So in the process of looking at our long-range forecasting, we recognized in 2022, 2023, we recognized this coming fiscal cliff, where the pandemic era funding that had been giving schools a boost was going to expire. We were hoping the legislature was going to come in and backfill that, and they didn't. So in 2024, we went to an operating referendum. And when we looked at the long-range forecast, we saw a gap that was only going to keep getting bigger and bigger. We saw a $2 million budget deficit in the coming year, $3 million after that, $4 million after that. It was going to keep growing. And so we said, this is not a temporary problem, and we don't want a temporary solution. So we tried to go for a recurring operating referendum. So as Chad mentioned, that's the one that is theoretically permanent, although if this state budget catches up to what schools need, it would kind of make that referendum obsolete. But that's not what folks hear when they hear a recurring referendum. And it was a long process of trying to explain all of this to the community. People heard that the district was asking for additional funds on an ongoing basis to keep paying our bills, to keep paying the teachers, to keep upgrading our technology, to keep doing all of this work that the community valued. And they said, well, a lot of people said, why can't you make this work? I make my home budget work, why can't you make this work? And so there was this notion in the community, not from everybody, but from a lot of people, of like, the school district is mismanaging funds, they're paying the superintendent too much, they're spending too much money on sports, they must be mismanaging funds if they can't do it. And so it really became this question of like, why are schools failing at doing this? Why is Menomonie failing at doing this when they shouldn't need to, right? Every school should be able to get by on what they get. Or if they can't, they just gotta tighten their belts. But tightening belts means laying off teachers, or it means cutting programs, right? It doesn't just mean like, cutting or turning off the lights more often. So what the school district was really in a position of having to try to sell the public schools as a product to people, right? To get them to buy in and like affirmatively choose to give more money to public schools. And people were kind of treating it like a Amazon order, right? Like, what are we getting from you? Why is it worth it? Why aren't you doing it right? Why aren't you doing this right? And again, this wasn't the only voice in the community, but it was very difficult because there's this set of rules around school funding that's so complex, and where school districts have so few options to figure out how to manage that funding. And it's really, really hard to communicate that to a community. So our referendum failed in 2024. At that point, we've had to sit down and say, well, what are we gonna do? Are we going to try to go again right away and maybe ask for a smaller amount or put a time limit on it? Or are we going to try to buy some more time? What can we do with the budget to try to kick the can down the road and see what happens in our next state budget? And ultimately, that's what we decided to do. So we did, took a look at some options. One thing that school districts have as an option is kind of a trust fund for what's called capital improvement projects. So any kind of building, upgrades, technology upgrades, or building repairs, putting on doors, fixing roofs. We can put it into this kind of special fund, and we get some aid benefit from it. And we can use that for those capital improvements. So we have a 30-year plan in Menomonie, which is great because we can kind of project out when is Oak Lawn Elementary going to need a new roof? When are we going to have to replace doors in the middle school? And we stopped making regular contributions to that fund. So that was the biggest budget adjustment we made. We said, okay, we normally put $800,000 to $1 million into that fund every year. We're gonna stop for now. We also ended up removing the French program from the high school. We only had one French teacher who was retiring. And that was a bummer for the students who took French. We made other kind of budget, we tightened the budget kind of contingencies in a few different places, but those were the biggest things we did. Right now, that kind of puts us on a collision timeline. So going into the referendum, we had a little bit of what's called a fund balance. So we had a little bit of money that allows us to make cash flow, not have to do short-term borrowing. And we could rely on that for a little bit, in addition to sort of the budget adjustments we were doing. We were approving budgets with a deficit, knowing we would, cut into that savings account. But now we're on a kind of a collision course, because between 2028 and 2030, depending on how things play out, we are going to run out of that fund balance, and we're also going to run out of funds to continue to do our capital improvement projects, right, if we don't keep adding to that. So we're in another situation where, depending on what happens in the next state budget, or it's hard to imagine a miracle that would come out of the next state budget, we're going to have to see another referendum of some kind. And we're in the process right now of figuring out, from what we learned the last time, which was a very difficult conversation. It was a big push that the school district, all the school board members, our superintendent, other representatives in the community were doing all of this work to try to explain to people, to explain to voters, why we were doing this and what we needed, which is part of the reason we wanted to go to a recurring referendum, because as Chad mentioned earlier, you do it for 3 years and then you gotta start over, which sounds exhausting. So now we're kind of getting geared up for what's the next conversation, how are we going to do that, how can we make sure we get a different outcome next time.
Thanks, Rachel. Everybody raise your hand if you want to be on the school board. Well, I think about Menomonie, though, because I remember your trust fund. I remember what a wise thing to do, and you can see what happened. The wheels just have to come off over time, and that's really sad. Please remember to write down questions for the end, because we'll have a good time to ask questions. Okay?
Do you want me to talk about the voucher transparency?
You have a little time, because I have a little time at the end that I don't need.
Okay.
So go ahead and talk
I'll just
about
do another minute. I didn't come up with a smooth segue into this. It's not kind of unrelated to our referendum woes in history, but recently something that the Menomonie School District did is we recognized how much of our property tax levy that was coming from the city, coming from the taxpayers and residents, was going toward private school vouchers. And that number was growing and growing and growing. And it was just last year that the state removed caps.
Oh, that's this year.
That's this year. So started with this year, the state removed caps from the number of kind of additional voucher students that could do that. And so we recognized how much that number was growing. And what we, with the assistance of Ethan and Chris, what we decided to do was pass a resolution asking our local municipalities to put that number on tax bills. So when people get their tax bills in January, it says this amount goes to the county, this goes to the city or the township, and this goes to the school district. That number that goes to the school district doesn't all go to the school district. And so what we're asking our city to do is recognize or call out right there on the tax bill how much of that actually goes straight toward private school vouchers. And that's something that WPEN has been encouraging a number of districts around the state to do. Our number is on it. It's $1.4 million for this school year.
Yeah, you can look at the slide that's up there. I'll leave it up there for a little bit. as far as who's reached in, how many districts that has happened, who's got their resolutions completed. Eau Claire's got theirs done, and we're headed to help or get it passed to the city council. But we work with districts with that, and there is a toolkit on our website. I will pull this up afterwards if you have any questions about the toolkit, but because Green Bay has put it on their tax bill, we do have the step-by-step information on how communities can do that, which in a lot of cases, communities have hubbed their school districts and taken that on for their school districts. Like Mike and Reed and Rachel and Chad can provide the numbers, but it really takes the community to help do that work. Okay. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. Well, I will just say, so at our point in the process, we passed that resolution last week at our school board meeting, and we'll be in the process next of approaching, I think, first the city council about the getting that for the 2027.
So before we introduce Mike, at Eau Claire Area School District, I mean, I've been connected by at the hip, what is it going on, 47 years, something like that? It's ridiculous, but I wanted to bring this, because it's wonderful. I wanted to bring this slide up first. This is the Article 10, Section 3 of the state constitution that is part of the lawsuit. And I just want to read it to you, because Mike will talk about this a little bit. The legislature shall provide by law for the establishment of district schools which shall be as nearly uniform as practicable, and such schools shall be free and without charge for tuition to all children between the ages of 4 and 20 years, and no sectarian instruction shall be allowed therein. Way long time ago. So if you go, here's Mike. We're going to introduce Mike now. Hi, Mike. Mike's superintendent of the Eau Claire School District. I am going to put some slides up here while Mike talks about the lawsuit, but he's got lots of other things as far as the Eau Claire story goes, because it's a good one too, right, Mike?
Well, I hope so.
Also, I reminded you about doing questions, and then when Mike, you're done, we'll have the panel maybe. If you have questions for each other, we'll do that first. Take a moment. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Holly Sweeney for asking me to speak. Reed, you said it very well. You just don't think you're, I have a lot of respect for the people who are up here, panelists who have been doing this longer than I've been a school superintendent. This is my 6th year in Eau Claire. I was so smart that I started right during the pandemic. But anyway, it's an honor, and I see so many community members, people that I've seen along the referendum trail in Eau Claire in 22 and 23. I see former teachers, I see present teachers, I see a couple of my old professors, and I see some colleagues in the Chippewa Valley in the educational field. Again, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'd like to turn back the clock a little bit to 1993. As Chris had shown in a slide, and Chad had talked about those revenue caps. That's when I started teaching. So I've known nothing but a cap. You know, and when I taught for 10 years, I taught in Abbotsford, I taught in smaller districts like Fall Creek, and then moved over this way a little bit to Eau Claire for a year, Rice Lake, Chippewa Falls. You just didn't think about that when you were a teacher. But when I became an administrator and the funds became far more important with budgeting, that knowledge over the last 20 years, you just see what the impact is. So 1993 was a very important year for those caps to be established. Number one, personally, because that's what I started under. The second one is how it impacted Eau Claire. Those of you who lived in this area, you know what happened right before that in Eau Claire. Uniroyal closed. So what did the school district do? They felt awful. They did not levy to the max. They really were feeling very badly for the community. The community was hurting, so they didn't levy to the max. But little did we know, something positive like that they did for the community would have the unintended consequences what it is today. So we are one of those low revenue ceiling districts. People assume, oh, Eau Claire, you're the 8th largest, you must get all this money. No. So that's why this is very important to us as well in Eau Claire. So, you know, when Chris and others asked me to speak about our story a little bit, you know, what did you think about the the past, legislation for schools, this past budget. And what I think many of us were hoping for, superintendents in CISA 10 and even statewide, we're talking about, a substantial increase in special education reimbursement was probably one. Second was an increase to that low revenue ceiling to close the gaps between Wisconsin school districts. If you don't know this little known fact, there's one Wisconsin school district, I believe, that 24,000? Okay. Just putting that in perspective. And then a third was to provide enough general aid to offset as much property tax impact as possible. I wouldn't even say, 2 out of the 3 didn't get addressed, and one, the special education funding was helped a little bit. But again, it didn't serve the students and our staff and our taxpayers of the state. So that's what had occurred. And how it impacted Eau Claire, there were some small positives. The high-cost special education reimbursement, 50% the first year, from what was it, 29.5% the year prior, and then the second year of the biennium, 90%. Okay, that's a good move forward. We have many high-cost special education students. There are other districts, smaller districts, that may not have any, so that doesn't help them. So the 325, for 400 years, yeah, it helped a little bit for this, but again, inflationary costs, very difficult. Special education, it was kind of the first bump that we've had with the 42 in the first year percent coverage and 45, but it was not some sufficient. It's called some certain, and in some circles it's called some certainly not, because it doesn't tend, we don't get that 42%. Many of our business folks here, we probably budgeted 38, 39% because we knew it wouldn't hit the 42. So that was disappointing for us. I'll just put this in our school district, just like other school districts too. You get that basically a third that's reimbursed. We're going through staffing right now in Eau Claire. In our budget for our hourly staff for special education aides and our special education teachers and professionals, it's around 24 million, let's just say, in staffing alone. So we get a third of that covered from the state. We got to come up with 16 million from our general fund. Now it's legally required. We are happy to serve those students. Love having each and every one of them. But that's $16 million that we're not able to take care of our other operational costs. That has to come from somewhere. So that's a little bit of the story about Eau Claire's story and how special education funding is so critically important. And then the no general aid. Well, certainly we thought there was some discussion about that low revenue ceiling, but that did not occur. So that was very disappointing. And then the big difference this year in our community was the state budget no general aid. That caused $2.9 million to go toward the taxpayers because we levied to the max. So we just passed an operational referendum in 2024 in November. We're very, very fortunate in Eau Claire to have that support of people. But again, that 2.9 extra that got placed on the taxpayers' bills, that doesn't feel good either with no general aid. Dr. Mark Elworthy is our Executive Director of Business Services. He predicted it. He shared it in public session in July. This is what we think is going to occur, and it's not going to feel good. And it really doesn't feel good because we just went out to the public in November of 2024. So ultimately, a little bit about the lawsuit. The superintendent does not determine whether to join a lawsuit. In our district, we were approached, again, my entire career, and most of the people on our executive team at central office, we've been in education long enough to know that these caps have really hurt not just Eau Claire, but the entire state. You heard a little bit where I taught. I grew up in Phillips, Wisconsin, about 2 hours from here. Same type of thing. So it's not just standing up for Eau Claire, but I'm proud to stand with the other 17 plaintiffs, the other 4 school districts, larger and smaller, Green Bay and all the way down into Cedar and Beloit and Adams Friendship. Proud to stand with them, but our board makes that determination. So we were approached, I'd say 3 to 4 months ago, if we were interested in this, and it was shortly after we adopted our budget in October. And I thought it was perfect timing because each one of our board members talked about the budget that was adopted, and we saw some predictions and projections for the future, and each one of them talked about the legislature and its inability to properly and equitably fund public schools. So when we had that meeting, that was determined by the board, we went forward, and last Tuesday, that's when the news dropped. Again, we're so fortunate in Eau Claire with our community in the past referenda, 2016 fairly recently, 2022 for capital, and 2024 for operational, each at 64%. We're very proud of that, but that comes with a price, and it comes with fatigue, and we can tell, we know it. It's difficult for folks to afford. I'm not just supporting Eau Claire, but I'm standing with other districts, but also standing for all school kids in Wisconsin, at my advanced age, getting close there. This is something that there's gonna have to be a decision. There's gonna have to be a decision made. And it'll take a while to get through the courts and things, but that formula and the amount of funding is it's unfair, unconstitutional, and I don't want to read right from the slides. And it's just, again, the problem and the solution. There's been plenty of media coverage about it locally as well as statewide, but quite honestly, have I been getting some emails and phone calls and text messages about the lawsuit? Yes, but I think people in Eau Claire, they understand. They've been more supportive. I expected a lot of negativity, and yeah, could that occur in the future? But that's the Eau Claire I know. But I know that there are so many other students and parents that feel the same way across the state, because our Wisconsin students are worth it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Mike. Does the panel have any questions of each other? Check.
I just want to add one thing. It's not a question, if I may. Mike's not the only superintendent that started locally during the pandemic, but the pandemic. That is a critical time in school funding. There was a lot of federal money that was pushed into education, but in Wisconsin, we were told, plug your budget gaps, no more revenue limited increases during that term, use your federal funding to balance your budget. At a time when federal funding was intended to bolster education and push kids through at a time when everything they knew in education didn't exist. Again, Mike mentioned predictability. Our legislators were warned, you have to have a way to backfill this. Like, we can't let the federal funding run out if we don't have a way to sustain our public schools. And 2 years ago during the biennial budget, I would say they got halfway there. They did lift the low revenue limit ceiling. They did provide some increases for public schools, but in 25-27 biennium, it was time to double down, and it didn't happen.
Thanks, Chad. Anyone else want to make an additional comment on the panel? No? The circle or the pie chart that you see up on the screen, this is another thing that the Eau Claire or the Wisconsin Public Education does. We go to every joint finance hearing and we track every single testimony at the mic. One year we did this and the legislature touted the fact that most people wanted help with transportation, and we were able to get them to retract it. Because every time we've done this, you can see what comes out on top. It's kids and education. So it's a nice tool that we can use to hold people accountable. And on that, I'm going to start some questions. Is that okay? I don't know if you want to, I'll read one and see who wants to answer it, something like that. Has the changes at the federal level, such as dismantling the Department of Education, impacted local funding support? Has it really impacted anyone?
But I think it caused us all to pause and say what's really gonna happen with
Thank you.
federal funding. And essentially, it was status quo. I mean, there was no increase to federal funding. In fact, I think most schools saw a slight decrease. Those funds have a specific purpose for them. So there again, that's another individual child's needs that's not gonna get met because the funding stayed the same or got a little bit smaller.
Do you think how they kind of distribute the state, the general purpose revenue for education in the state, that then that changes too a little bit because you're thinking about what you might not get? Can you just say, we don't get much from the federal government though.
I think for most of us, it's less than 5%.
So, when it, you know, back in the day when I started out, I had a budget in my, you know, back in the 70s, I had my own classroom budget, I had a full-time aide, and you can see how that's just withered away and the kids aren't getting what they really should, right? Okay, thank you. There should be massive, relentless outrage throughout Wisconsin by the full range of
Demographics.
oh, I couldn't see the end of it, demographics in our state. And not just interested groups, right?
Interest groups.
Just interesting.
Is that a comment?
And then the questions on the other side.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't know they had two-sided. Legislators legislators, especially members of the Budget Finance Committee, with their historic values, priorities, and policies have been given too much of a free pass this evening, as it being the elephants in the room. Informing communities about effects such as the use of vouchers to divert funds from public to private schools remains a great need. How can we promote deeper, broader, and continuous confrontation of our legislature?
I'll just share a little bit, since I started this position in 2020. I've had the opportunity to connect with our area legislators on both sides of the aisle. As I said before, with 64% support with a referendum, you know, there are plenty of Republicans and Democrats that support our public schools, and they have for many, many years. We've got Jordan Sims here from CISA 10, he's the agency administrator. We got Jeff Holmes, superintendent at Chippewa Falls Area School District. What I'd like to share is that we have the opportunity to speak with our legislators. Just in this past budget cycle, especially down to the wire, speaking with, reaching out Christian Phelps here from Eau Claire, as well as Clint Moses from Menomonie. It really feels good when you reach out to a whole bunch of legislators, including on the Joint Finance Committee, that those folks are not on it, but at least hopefully they're sharing that message and calling me back, and I really do appreciate that. But again, I believe next month we have a superintendent's meeting, a monthly superintendent's meeting, where our legislators are invited and show up, and we do share with them, what our concerns are, ask for their questions, and spend a good hour and a half with them. But it's just consistent. We just have to continue to do it.
And I'll just remind everybody that as much as it's important for professionals to be in contact with legislators, it is more important that you be in contact. Legislators listen to their constituents, not always the way you want them to, but when they hear from enough people, that pressure does build. And we see responses in the legislative activities and actions when we know people are responding. When the league sends out a call to action and we have a very good return rate on that call, I'm getting calls from legislators about, is this really a thing? Yeah, yes, really a thing. We put a lot of pressure on this year about J-Card joint finance, not releasing funds that were appropriated in the last budget cycle. And legislation ultimately got introduced that would force J-Card's hand, that they would not have that authority, only the legislature has the appropriating authority. So it does matter, but if they don't hear from you, that matters too.
I just wanted to say, when I joined the school board the first year, I went to a half-day workshop on school finance. And I'm pretty good with budgets. And my head was spinning. And I said to my colleague who was there with us, like, if they wanted to create a system that no one would understand, so no one would be able to challenge them on it, I don't know how they could have done it better. Because our school finance system, Chad did a great job. The pictures, I like the pictures rather than the pizza, that's a good one. But it's complicated and it's non-intuitive, and I think I'm so happy to see so many people here tonight learning about this. To me, that's it was one of the big challenges, with a referendum, but I think it's also a challenge in getting, after the 325 was passed in the 23-25 budget, smart people said to me, "Wow, what are you going to do with all your extra money?" And I'm like, that's not what just happened. And I think getting people to understand what's going on, so when the budget pass, when they pass a budget that has these insufficient improvements, it has this insufficient support for public schools, I think it's really hard for people to understand. So that's why I love that WePen does this, and I'm so glad people are here tonight. Tell your friends how bad this is.
As far as connecting to your legislators, everyone should do that. I just had an experience. I just started calling a legislator in my region that I cover for the network, and I called weekly, twice a week. Finally had a new staffer, and honest, I got 4 hours with that person the next week. So I mean, it does help. And as far as Rachel's comment, when you go, well, you just got $325, per pupil, and everybody said, that's a lot of money. Well, I would call and they would say, well, you just got $1 billion in the budget. And I said, it's kind of how it's spent, isn't it? Because we have $1 billion a year now going out for vouchers. So that's the kind of conversation. And we're here I'm there, call me up. We are all there for you as far as you need information if you hear something that doesn't sound right. Okay? Right? We are, right? Okay, another question? Right? What effect does the voucher program have on the revenue deficit? Does the voucher program cause the deficit?
Well, so for individual school districts that have schools in their community that accept vouchers, families who qualify, it comes out of our state aid portion of our revenue limit, and it goes directly onto property taxpayer bills. I think that's the biggest piece of transparency or lack of transparency in this entire process that has really caused an uproar, and I am very excited to see the toolkit and see how transparently that can relate to all of you individuals as property taxpayers to say, this is how much of your property taxes is going to vouchers.
Just one thing to add on to that as well is we don't know who those students are either. So especially for bigger school districts, like you were saying that you lose more in voucher school funding than a school district like Eau Claire that's over twice the size. But it's quite possible that, and who would know, but that kids might be overlapping, or that you might not be getting charged as much, or you might be getting doubly charged, because we don't know who those students are that are going to through the voucher program or going to those private schools. So, and for us, you guys are probably talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. For us, it's $50,000, but that's a teacher. So we lose $50,000 out of our operational budget, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but, or at least an aid, you know, somebody that we could have in front of our kids, impacting our kids every day.
Thanks, Reed. Anybody else?
I think that impact is important. Thanks, Reed, for sharing Augusta's perspective. It's $2.6 million in Chippewa Falls that our property taxpayers are paying for vouchers,
And they don't know it.
and they don't know.
That's why the voucher transparency, I helped write the voucher transparency bill back in 2015 because I was on the school board, and I found out that they shifted it to the taxpayers, and I was kind of sitting next to Dana Wax, remember, when he was in the assembly, and he said, well, let's write a bill. I said, okay, so I worked with his staffer, we wrote this bill, but it didn't come out for a while, 2019, and it has never had a hearing. It's never been brought out on the floor. It's there, okay? Here's another one. The legislature has long refused to fix the funding formula, and the special education funding is especially underfunded, and the voucher schools have ever increased funding. Can you think of reasons why the legislature has done this other than they want public schools eventually to fail and ultimately close?
The people have the power. The legislature knows it.
There's your answer. You're all here tonight. You can all go back, sign up, get the stuff from the network. Know if Chippewa Falls is going to referendum, they need somebody on their team. Eau Claire, the same thing, Menomonie, the same thing, Augusta, well, they're going soon, so we can help you, you know, and tell the true story. Because I really don't know where we're at unless it gets fixed. Is the Wisconsin legislature following another state's lead in mimicking the voucher program? Which one? It is, you know, to answer this question, and I just answered, yes, it's happening all over the United States, but there are some states that they've been able to fight against it. And so as Mike, I just love it when your districts speak for each other, that it isn't just Eau Claire and it just isn't Chippewa. You guys truly, the 421 districts in Wisconsin are really supporting each other. I feel that more and more every day. And that wasn't always that way, you know. And I hope the lawsuit helps people to understand that we're in a place right now where everybody has to want to fix this. Because truly, right, we don't know where this is taking us. And it's a little scary. I gotta,
I could relate to that.
yes.
I was working at the Department of Public Instruction in the 1990s, and that's when Tommy Thompson worked with Alec and started the voucher system in Milwaukee.
Yeah, it goes back that way. But it's been kind of a 40-year march for the publics, you know, statewide with what's happening, if you really look back. Yes, sir?
One of the things that I would suggest, if you get an opportunity, Dr. Howard Fuller out of Milwaukee, when the voucher systems first got created, you know, he was a huge proponent of it. And the reason for his support for vouchers was because he wanted for folks that were not in a great financial position to be able to get two schools that were in that part of the state that were well above many of the public schools in the urban areas. And he just recently did an article.
He's got, yeah, they've got a documentary, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's amazing to hear about it. You know, he's completely reversed his view on the voucher system, and it's greatly appreciated that he would himself come out and speak like he does against vouchers in the current form.
As did his partner Holly Williams. They both helped found it, and they both pulled out for the same reasons that you're citing.
Wow. How would we see that documentary?
Somebody, well, they just
Google
have,
it.
yeah, Google it.
Just Google
Howard
it.
Fuller?
Howard Fuller, and I can't remember the name of it, but it came out against.
And they just had it on Upfront on Sunday, on Upfront, the Wisconsin Upfront show. They talked about it. I just heard about it, what, 2 days ago?
Yeah.
So you're up to date, sir.
It is being rerun this month on Wisconsin PBS, but I don't know a date either.
But watch it, look for it, you know?
Yeah.
Why can't the school aid formula be fixed? Like,
I'm waiting for others to grab the mic too
this is
for
a
this one.
this is a very good
What I will say is, and this is one thing that I learned very on when I started here in Eau Claire and got to join CISA 10. If you saw like that first slide, it said that was supposed to be in 1993. That was supposed to be a 5-year fix, that formula. Well, here we are, how many years later? But there have been numerous blue ribbon committees. You know, we didn't just superintendents back then, and there were some legislators that they didn't just complain about it. They came up with certain ideas over the course of the years. The gentleman I think so highly of, John Geyer from Neelsville. He was part of at least one of those, and he just retired as a superintendent in Neelsville, but he still coaches basketball. But John is just a tremendous, I think he's a tremendous superintendent, but he was part of those groups, and they have people that are willing to help. And they've come up with many different ideas and solutions where there aren't necessarily winners and losers, where everybody gains something.
There's a Blue Ribbon Commission report that's sitting on a shelf. You can Google Blue Ribbon Commission and the document will come up, and each part of the funding formula that needed to be fixed, so they went all over the state and got input, and then they had experts come in. That you can find that video as well. Get in touch with me, I'll help you find it. I know I look at it all the time. And then they give options on how to fix it. It's kind of how it looks, right? It's never been looked at. And there's a legislator who sits on the Assembly Education Committee who was the co-chair of that committee. So, you know, I mean, we sit here and go, just like, okay? Why didn't public funds supporting children in private schools come with more student achievement accountability measures? I want to say after this conversation tonight, what do you think?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't, yeah.
Are there any?
Yeah, I mean, to tell you the truth, the schools receiving vouchers can probably supply as much accountability as they want. But it's up to them. And most go for whatever that, what is that, they get a
State report card.
yeah, and they also sometimes go for accreditation. But I,
Does that go for homeschoolers too?
no.
No. A lot of those accountabilities for private brokerage schools also have to do, it's determined whether or not, if they take federal dollars. If they tie themselves to any of the federal dollars, they will have to do more reporting.
There's a question, go ahead.
Well, I can just say too, something that we experienced down in Augusta was, we were not having enough students. A number of students were opting out of the state testing, and that kind of flagged us, kind of put us on, probation or warning, so to speak. And we've since rectified that, but the point is that we have to test every single student. Unless there's a very exceptional situation, we are required to test and report every student situation. So just, there are some kids, believe it or not, I know they don't want to sit down and take a standardized test for 45 minutes straight. They might just go C, just so they can be done with it. We might have some students that have, a significant need. It does not matter. They're still required to take that, and then we're still required to report on that. So just so you all know that's our measure of accountability, is that we test all of our students, and I don't think the same can be said for the private schools.
Thanks, Rita. Anyone else want to comment? No? Here's another question. These are really good questions, everyone. Will the live streaming be available on League of Women Voters website?
Probably tomorrow.
Probably tomorrow. Thanks, Steve.
Let's all get Steve a hand for doing that.
Here's a question about what classes, can you give some stories from your districts about what classes are being cut to compensate for revenue deficit? Maybe some real stories?
Yeah, so, in Menomonie, I mentioned the French program. That was a pretty, small number of students who were still taking it, and we do a lot of virtual school options for language at the high school, so, but that was the only program that was cut, but I will say it was definitely it has over the last several years been a factor in thinking about class sizes and sectioning, so not necessarily cutting any, I don't believe we've cut any other classes besides French, but we have in some cases ended up with larger sizes in freshman English classes, sometimes larger sizes in 4th and 5th grade elementary, trying to like squeeze what we can, we look at the staffing plan every year, it's like, well, could we, and I should say, like, hasn't resulted in layoffs, but it's just been like, oh, this person's retiring, can we shuffle things around so we don't need to hire a replacement, is more often what that looks like.
English, math, social studies, science, tech ed, business ed, and we have raised class sizes across our K-12 system.
And that's the truth.
There have been reductions in co-curricular activities as well.
You can all answer this maybe one at a time. When you weigh all the information needed to make budget decisions, what grounds you?
I guess we always say that we just try to keep the students in the forefront. That's why we're here. That's what we do. We talk about that all the time. It certainly comes down to, I think, relevance and need as well. What classes. The one thing that did come out of COVID is it did expand our opportunities with dual enrollment, coursework or virtual learning, where kids can be in our school and maybe taking a class through CVTC or taking a class on the Cadence Network through our CISA with another high school teacher in could be districts away or miles away. So that is one really good thing that COVID and that technology, that the way we had to change doing education has stuck a little bit, but I still don't think that there's the same as just getting that personal connection, being able to look at the teacher, ask them questions, interact with your peers, because I think that's at the end of the day, education is really about socializing and making our students the best citizens that they can be, so they have those opportunities when they leave. And I would argue that, sometimes sitting behind a screen, or if your interactions are artificial in nature, you don't develop those relational skills, you don't develop those communication skills that are necessary to have success in the world. So while we try to minimize the impact on students as much as possible and try to access and use the technology to our advantage, it does come with limitations. So I think that's the biggest challenge. The other thing too is sometimes I'll get a question about what we're cutting and why wouldn't we cut, why wouldn't we start with extracurriculars if they're extra, but my argument there is that's why kids come to school, and we want, and 90% of our kids are attached to some type of club or extracurricular, co-curricular activity, athletics, whatever it might be, and that's what engages those students. They come to school to be a part of that, and if you start taking those things away, then they're going to leave your school, and that's your revenue stream. We need more kids coming in rather than going out, and declining enrollment's already a challenge. If we start taking those extracurricular opportunities away, I believe that more students, because they have more options to go on virtual or distance learning, homeschooling, or just down the road for us to Fall Creek or Altoona or Eau Claire or up to Cadott or over to Osseo Fairchild, we're in a really tough spot, so we have to be competitive with what we offer. And I believe that extracurriculars are part of the whole student experience.
Yeah, I think the classroom experience and the student support, right? When we have to make difficult budget decisions, or we have to think about class sizes or cutting things, right? The question is like, how do we minimize any detrimental impact on the classroom experience and student support? And, you know, eventually those things catch up to you. We minimized that by deferring our contributions to our capital improvement plan, and classroom experience is bad if the roof leaks. So there is a long-term effect to that, but like thinking in the immediate term, like what is the classroom experience for those kids?
It's a mixture. It's always students first, but when it comes down to it, you know, in Eau Claire, we've recently been discussing this past fall with our enrollment declining, neighborhood schools, elementary schools. We're down another 150 students, or 110 students at the elementary level this next year. And we've got 13 elementary schools. And we're, like I said, we're right in the middle of staffing right now in Eau Claire. And seeing some of these 3-section buildings that were, what I mean by 3-section, you got one building with 3 kindergarten sections, you know, 3 first. Now some of them are going down to 2, where not the entire building is a 2-section school, but, you know, that's a concern too. Will those students have a place to go? Certainly. Will they have a person in front of them? Certainly. But it's their neighborhood, especially for 6 years as an elementary child. It was mentioned before too about, you know, have we cut anything? In 2024, we went to the community to say we want to keep our class size ratios. That was one of our 4 bullet points. And we've stayed with that. But the flip side in Eau Claire, especially at the secondary level, is we're proud of it, but it's something we've had to cut back on, is some of our electives. We're no longer running classes of 8 or 10 or 11. We can't afford to do that anymore. That adds up. Even though they're special, you know, it might be a AP art history, let's just say. It's got to go every other year. We've had to go hybrid with some things, and between North and Memorial, that's one thing I'm proud of, but again, those are difficult decisions. Then it's, okay, if you're not going to adjust the class size ratios at each one of those schools, which we promised we wouldn't, then it's the periphery. And, you know, people just assume all the people at 500 Main, they can just all go. But there's a lot of work and organization that has to occur with those folks too. But yeah, it's difficult for everyone. I think it's going to be in the next couple of years. We have more healthcare increases and things of that nature, and not much help from the state budgets. We're going to have to reduce some programming.
Anybody else want anything? Do you realize it's 7:25?
Yeah, to not be repetitive, you know, our mega result in Chippewa Falls absolutely puts kids first. From there, it's our strategic plan and our priorities, our graduation requirements, and all the things we're required to do.
Thanks, Chad. There's a quick question here. My dear friend, Dr. Lindsay, where is he? Is he still in here? Yeah. He brought me the hot off the press numbers on the vouchers, and somebody asks, what's the difference in funding between public and voucher students? So what is your per pupil, Chad, in Chippewa?
$11,650.
Reed?
13,030.
Okay.
I think it's 11,700.
Okay. 11,700. Okay.
Yeah.
Here are the numbers for the vouchers, just so you're aware. Rates per pupil and students in the K-6, because vouchers pay different amount for K-6 than they do for 9-12. In 25-26, 10,877, and the high school is 13,371. Right, so you see, they're starting to get more per pupil than public schools, and they don't take everyone. The special needs scholarship program per pupil is 16,049. And then the independent charter, which we don't have the numbers for this year, That's another one, and independent charter schools get 11,721. So just kind of think about that. Before I hand it over to ending the evening, thank you all for coming, but I want you to look at these 4 people here and see the miracle of public schools, because they are our amazing leaders who take us in places and keep fighting along in this awful whatever we're going through. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I too want to extend my thanks. It's events like this that really, I think, reinforce how important the public is in policy decisions in the state of Wisconsin. You know, we talked tonight about being in touch with our legislators. We've had compelling arguments from administrators as to what they need from you citizens to make the wheels spin for public education. And from my standpoint, and I'm not an educator, but I do know that without the foundation of a strong education, our democracy is at risk. It's at risk today because we have people, too many people in the United States, like close to 50%, who cannot even name the 3 branches of government. It is not at all surprising to me that in that reality, when misinformation and disinformation is coming at us, full speed ahead, that we become susceptible. We're vulnerable to that kind of misinformation because we don't know the facts. And we're only going to know the facts when kids are taught it in school. And I applaud all of these folks being at the front line. That's where the rubber meets the road. Thank you to the League for bringing this event together. Thank you, Chris and WPEN, for being such wonderful partners. I mentioned Julie before. We're in cahoots. Julie runs a lot of our education stuff for the League, and she's the president. So, WPEN. With that, thank you, and thank you for being here. Yes?
This year, Bo Ryan is dead. Bo Ryan has died. And the present coach of the Wisconsin Badgers, he and his wife are expecting twins.
Can't hear. We can't hear him.
All our artificial intelligence.
That's okay.
Listen to you say how people are getting
Yeah. I want to, we're done, but I want to invite you all to the summer summit. Josh, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I wasn't here when the slide went up, so maybe you announced it, but I'm working hard to get, I'm Josh Miller, Clear City Council. I know the school board passed the transparency resolution, and I'm working hard to get that approved so we can get an insert on our bill. It's not official yet, but we're working hard to push that through, so hopefully this fall, Eau Claire will also have the insert for the tax transparency to show the Dodger School funding that's happening in our district. So
Yeah, Josh,
Thank you, Plaintiff Josh.
Yeah, thank you. Also, we have a summer summit in Superior, July, what does it say on there? July 23rd and 24th. We're hoping to have a gubernatorial panel the night before. Plan a vacation around it. Come on, we have, the diversity in this room, that's what the summit is like. And it's just a great place to percolate and learn things about what you did tonight, and you could be part of a group there too. You need to maybe take a boat ride next period. So, the stuff's back on the table. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.